Breakfast puppies?
This podcast contains adult language and content and is meant for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
You're listening to The Glitterbois. This is the way.
Carrying on our talk about the Palladium combat rules, we're getting down into one topic that is extremely confusing to a lot of new players and old, and that is attacks per melee. To clarify, dear listener, Palladium uses the term melee and round interchangeably. Usually when it says per melee, it also means per melee round.
Yeah.
It's just their weird terminology.
There's a couple ways that attacks per melee work in the Palladium system. You can get them from two main places, and that is your hand-to-hand combat skill, whether it's, basic, expert, martial art, assassin, commando, or you can get some through specific OCCs.
And it's important to note that what Palladium calls an attack per melee actually is an action per melee these days. Back in the day, when we go back down to like first edition, which was really just at that time an evolution of some AD&D house rules, I think, that Kevin and his crew were using, it really was attacks. Like a combat round back in the day, you made an attack and that was it. And you moved on.
Yeah.
Go down in turn, stabbing each other until someone dies. One thing that was revolutionary about Palladium at that time was that characters would begin the game with multiple attacks. Like you could start with one or two or even three attacks sometimes. And that was pretty cool. Playing Dungeons and Dragons, when you as a warrior even didn't even get your second attack until a few levels higher. Even then, only in a weapon that I think you had specialized in, depending upon what edition you were playing. But then over time, it evolved into actions per melee, but still kept the attacks term. So like things like reloading costs an attack, or aiming to get an aim bonus will cost an attack.
Or depending on the size of your robot, an entire melee round.
Yeah. And that's a point of confusion in that some actions you will find will say like, this cost 1 of your attacks, or this cost 2 of your attacks, or something else will say this cost half of your attacks. And other things might be this cost all of your attacks. And you're like,
yeah,
that's fascinating. So some people will say, oh, wait, so if it costs half my attacks and I have a lot of attacks, that just means the more attacks I have, the more penalized I am. And I'm like, no, not really. It's just sort of dividing time.
It is important to note that attacks per melee is kind of that's your entire round in any combat or initiative situation. There's a few free actions, but I've never seen them quantified. Have you?
What do you mean?
Like, talking as a free action. I've never seen that written anywhere specifically in the rules, at least in Rifts.
I don't recall ever seeing that anywhere.
Yeah.
I know that I've played many role-playing games where they go out of their way to define the concept of the free action, such as
3-5. Yeah.
Shadowrun did the same thing in later editions. Yeah. Games that are so specific about their currency of interaction with the mechanics. Those games are a lot more specific than Rifts or than Palladium is, which it is oddly specific at sometimes, but this is one where it's kind of open-ended.
Yeah, especially since there's not a lot of movement as action rules. It's generally thought that you can move and attack. You can walk and chew gum. There are a few situations where that's not the case, but movement isn't generally considered one of your actions unless you're doing something incredible with your movement.
In fact, it even goes the opposite direction of assuming that you are moving while you're acting, so much that in the more recent books, it even breaks down how much you can move per action. While you are taking other actions, what the maximum amount of movement you can do.
I haven't seen that. What's that in?
It's in Rifts.
In Ultimate?
Yeah, I forget the exact page reference, but essentially you divide your speed by your attacks per melee, and that's your how much you move per attack, which then does penalize people for having a lot of actions, because that means they can move only shorter distances between each action. And of course, Palladium's actions are kind of a back and forth setup. So I think that if you're digging that deeply into the mathematical breakdown of movement per action, you're doing it wrong. You should focus on being a bit more freeform and descriptive with your actions, because that's what Palladium, in my opinion, allows you to do best.
I would say in this system, however, as an avid 40K player, I would say that, I have a variety of rulers and tape measures all lovingly crafted and ready to go. So it's a misnomer. Attacks per melee you will get primarily from your hand to hand, but that covers everything from firing guns, shooting missiles, shooting down incoming missiles, talk about that later, and all manner of things. It's your interaction points in a combat round. Now, you get those from your hand-to-hand, and as an example, in one of our campaigns, I'm playing a Cyber Knight. Now, a Cyber Knight gets an extra hand-to-hand attack just for starters. Now, interestingly enough, that can be used not as a hand-to-hand attack, just like all the rest of them, even though it is thought that it's used with a sword.
So it's like straight up extra attack per melee, not like an extra sword or attack or an extra gun attack.
Correct.
It's pretty badass. Any class that gives you extra attacks at first level or even in the low levels is giving you a distinct advantage of ability over your opponents. And that's pretty awesome.
Especially when you consider that in Rifts or Palladium in general, let's say you're maxed out, you're tough as hell, you have 7 attacks, right? You're just, you have an amazing amount of dexterity.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're always unleashing a ton of fire downrange. That is also, you are dodging like a motherfucker because you stepped into a room and there is all kinds of badness waiting for you in there.
Well, this is a good point to bring up, that in Palladium, you may have picked up, if you've been listening for a while, that Palladium's combat system is a back and forth setup, and that when you take an attack against another character at the table, if that character is able and willing, they can then actively defend against that attack. Now, if it's a melee attack, they can parry it. And if it's a melee or a ranged attack, they can try and dodge it. Depending upon what their combat skills are, they may get one or both of those for free. But most commonly, people can parry for free, but dodging costs an attack.
Yeah. Now, it's worth noting that unless you're sitting in your power armor and blowing away stone-tipped spear primitives in the jungle, you should not spend all of your attacks. It's tempting to do so. In fact, I've played a character that was entirely that. But while you can borrow from the current round, even if you haven't gone yet, I don't believe you can borrow from future rounds. Can you?
You can. You can always dodge by spending future actions. I think they call it the infinite. I think it's the infinite dodge rule. Yeah.
Huh, okay.
As long as you're alive, you can keep dodging, but you are taking away your attacks from future rounds. So let's say you have 4 attacks per melee. That means you can take 4 actions. And let's say you spend some of those dodging and you run out of attacks, but then you dodge 5 more times in that same round. Well, you have now spent all of your actions for the next round. You just don't get to act, and one from the one following that.
So theoretically, it is possible to step out of the castle and see the arrow storm coming towards you and spend the next 10 minutes worth of actions in dodging.
It technically is, because I don't believe that prevents you from moving. So if your dodge is really high, like really, really high, you can just spend all your actions running straight across the battlefield, which you might think, dear listener, sounds unrealistic, but it also sounds awesome. That's what
Think about it this way, though. Imagine the kind of effort that would take in real life as a toll on your body. So, yes, all that time has gone by, but you are spending the rest of that going after you have, done these insane gymnastics to avoid the arrow storm. That was just the example that led to mine, though.
Now, if we go back to where the game began, we look at, of course, Mechanoids and Palladium Fantasy role-playing game. In those games, you started with 1 or 2 attacks per melee. You did not get a whole lot of attacks. It was 2, just 2. And then at some point over the years, that increased. I'm not 100% sure when it did, because even right here in this Rift's original Butts on the Cover edition, characters only got 2 attacks based upon their combat skill of choice. Or I think the assassin might have, hold on, let me look this up, let me verify. Here we go. Nope, that's robot power armor. Missiles.
Get to that.
Assassin only started with 1 attack per melee at first level, which went up to 3 at second level. And that was a fantastic advantage.
Now, as a counterpoint, in modern Rifts, hand-to-hand basic starts with 4.
Mm-hmm. At some point, the rule became known as 2 for being alive. I don't know when it started this way, but characters were assumed to have 2 in addition to whatever was in their character sheet based on skill or character class.
Right.
So when the Ultimate Edition came out, they changed that. It's no longer the 2 for being alive. They just updated everything. So now it shows that base of 4. Maybe out there is a Palladium historian who can give us a more definite answer of when that changed. But for the longest time, when I was growing up playing Palladium games, 2 was the base and not 4.
Did the definition of what you could do in a combat round change? Like, were you allowed to reload for free? Were you allowed to dodge freely? I haven't opened the Butts edition cover since high school.
When we played, we allowed things like, no, actually, we didn't allow much at all for free. So if you wanted to reload, that was an action. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to fire switch to a special mode, that mode might have had extra attack costs. Like I think like shooting full burst spreads cost additional actions and so on.
Yeah.
Swapping out a weapon cost an action. I don't recall there ever being a lot that was specifically stated as free.
Yeah.
Because I know that reload is cost and actions all the way back to when crossbows were a thing in Palladium Fantasy. Because, reloading the crossbow was one of the reasons that you had to consider whether or not you wanted to use the crossbow. It breaks down a little when you work in psionics.
Honestly, I've never played a spellcaster or a psionicist of any kind in Rifts. So I'm not the person to ask. There's big shiny robots and, Wandering Ronin. I tend to play those.
Well, psionicists can make as many mental attacks as they have hand-to-hand attacks. That means that if you're a good boxer, which gives you, if you take the physical skill boxing at level 1, hot tip, dear listener, if you're unfamiliar with Palladium and you have a character that can take the boxing skill, you take that at level 1 because it gives you an extra attack per melee. The more
and
you know.
Athletics and running and gymnastics. Always remember that.
Yeah, but boxing gives you that extra attack. But if you can box, that means you can think faster. That gives you an extra psionic attack per melee.
Yeah. I think that's about all I had on attacks per melee.
Yeah, they refresh every round. It's just chances are you're going to be spending a lot of them just shooting or stabbing or dodging. Those are the main things. Yeah. But never forget in Rifts, at least, that you can spend additional attacks to enhance your rolls. So before you choose to attack someone, you can preemptively spend one more attack to aim, giving yourself a bonus to your roll, or to call the shot, meaning, I'm just going to spend an extra attack to line it up so that I hit him in the foot. Or you can then aim and call by spending 2 extra attacks to get both the bonus and the hit location.
One thing I'd also like to say is if you still have a question about these, we tend to read our comments fairly regularly. So if you do have a question, you can either pop over to our Discord and post it there, or you can leave a comment on any of the wonderful 100-odd sites that host this podcast, and we'd love to hear from it, and we may even answer it.
Including corrections. If you know something that we don't, or
absolutely.
If we're wrong, please call us out, let us know. Engage us in a conversation. We love it. Oh, I did want to give a bit of shout out here to someone on Reddit who goes by the name of The Mini Ghost of a Man. The Mini Ghost of a Man blew my mind with a bit of initiative attack per melee management advice. And that is, instead of taking your attacks per melee and putting them all in one round, split them across 3 rounds, evenly across. So if you have 4 attacks per melee, round 1, you'll have 2, round 2, you'll have 1, and round 3, you'll have 1. However, if you have 8 attacks per melee, like a badass juicer, then you'd have 3 attacks, then 3 attacks, and then 2 attacks. This we started doing in one of my weekend games very recently, and it's amazing. It is one of the best methods of initiative management I've ever used for Rifts or Palladium. I'm surprised I haven't been doing it this for years, and now that I know it, I'm going to be doing it for years.
Why? What's the benefit of that?
The benefit is that it makes things more fluid. So instead of, let's say, you have a juicer with 8 attacks and a normal guy with 4 attacks, the juicer goes first and then blows all of his 8 attacks. Well, congratulations. Now we have to spend however long adjudicating these 8 attacks right there at the top of the round, which can slog things down. By spreading things across, it gives more people chances of acting, while also making it easier to move from person to person to person to person.
See, I thought you were saying to spread your attacks so you can hold for defense, is where I thought you were going with that.
Essentially what I'm saying is to roll initiative for a round and then turn that into 3 rounds. And then like take whatever you rolled, hold that initiative roll for 3 rounds. And then, but Rift's, your combat round is 15 seconds. So now it's 3 rounds of 5 seconds.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
It took me a minute to process it. If you're on Reddit and you go to the Rifts Reddit community, there was a post that I made looking for a digital initiative tracker. The very first comment on that is from the Mini Ghost of a Man with a suggestion. It's very highly upvoted, relatively for the sub at least, and it's mind-blowing. So thanks, dude. That's a great idea. It made my last weekend game move so much faster.
Okay, yeah, 5-second intervals. I like it.
And another side effect of that is that one of the rules for movement is that your speed breaks down into how many yards you can move per round. Well, a yard is 3 feet. So divide that by 3, and that's how many feet you move per round. No more math.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Well, that's all I got. Anything, Matthew?
No, that's attacks per melee. It's not a terribly complicated thing unless you're staring into your Rifts book at the first time, enthralled by the pictures, but wondering what the fuck to do next. It works out pretty easly. God, 15 seconds is a long round.
It is. Well, first edition Palladium was a minute with half the number of attacks.
Oof. Yeah, no. All right, folks. That's attacks per melee. We love you. We'll see you on the next one.
See you later. You've been listening to The Glitterbois, a Palladium Books fan podcast. Glitterbois, Rifts, the Megaverse, and all other such topics are the property of Kevin Siembieda and Palladium Books. Please buy all their stuff and help keep them in print and making more games. You can order directly at palladiumbooks.com, and their entire catalog is available digitally at Drive-Thru RPG as well. Our opening music is 8-Bit Bass and Lead by Furby Guy from freesound.org. This closing music is Caravana by Philip Gross, available at freemusicarchive.org. All sound effects used are self-made or acquired via Creative Commons 0 license. If you like what you have heard, find us on Twitter and Facebook as The Glitterbois. That's BOIS. And check us out online at breakfastpuppies.com/glitterboys. And also join us on the Breakfast Puppies Network Discord at breakfastpuppies.com/discord. And if you want to help us out, please spread the word and help us build a community. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.